Roger, could you state for the recording what war branch you served in?
I served in the United States Army from 1967 to 1971 and was in the Vietnam War.
What was your rank?
My last rank I got out was a Specialist 5th class, Spec 5.
Where did you serve?
Well, I was in the Army. I went into Fort Leonard Wood when I left home for basic training. I served there for my 8 weeks of basic training. From there, they sent me to EOD school. I went from Fort Leonard Wood to Anniston, Alabama, Fort McClellan, and that's where we did our EOD chemical school. From there, I went to Indian Head, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., and this is a naval school that was where the EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal School, main school was at. There was other places that we did, Eglin Air Force Base for training. But after school, I went to upstate New York to Camp Drum for my first EOD team. I served up there for, I think it was about 6 months or so, or something like that, until I got my orders to go to Vietnam. Then from June of 68 to June of 69, I was in Vietnam. From Vietnam, I went to Karamsel, Turkey. After serving about a year and 9 months in Turkey, I got discharged in Turkey and came home.
How many years were you in the service?
All total, I had 4 years in the Army, from March the 13th, 1967 to March the 12th, 1971. 4 years.
So you served in the Army?
Yes, in the U.S. Army.
Where were you living at the time?
At the time when I went in, I was living in Kokomo, Indiana. But being born in Anderson, Indiana, moved up to Amboy. After being about 1 year old, I moved to Amboy. But basically, most of my life was really living in Amboy, Indiana, in Miami County. But actually did go out of Kokomo.
How did you happen to serve in this war?
Well, all my life, I always wanted to be in the Army. As a kid, I played Army, and like some of the other kids might play cowboys and Indians or robbers or whatever. Me and a buddy of mine always played Army, so I always wanted to go in the Army. And then as I got to the age of 19, and in that same period of like 1967, obviously Vietnam was on, and so I enlisted, decided to go in, and with the Vietnam era going, and thought I would like to go and do my bit for the American cause. But that's how I decided to go into the Army and go into during the Vietnam era.
What were you doing before you were enlisted?
Before I enlisted, one of the reasons why I moved to Kokomo was obviously living in Amboy. There wasn't a whole lot of work there except for farm work, so I moved to Kokomo, Indiana, and got a job with the local power company. It was called Public Service Indiana, and there I went to lineman's apprenticeship program and did my apprenticeship through public service. And became a lineman, but that's what I was doing basically before I went to into the Army.
Did anyone else in your family serve in the military?
Yes, I had my father, like I say, was in the Army. I have, I'm sure, I know many other relatives served, especially back in World War II. Probably one of my favorite relatives. I have my great-great-grandfather, Andrew McCormack, served during the Civil War. And he was at the end of the war, he was a prisoner of war during the Civil War. And after it was over, they were sending him back up home on the Sultana, I think it was called. I hope I got this right. But anyway, and it blew up, and a lot of the prisoners died, but he made it back home. They thought he was assumed dead, but they actually have his letter in the Soldiers and Sailors Monument at Circle Center monument in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we have his letters in the Civil War Museum, and that I always thought was pretty neat.
Can you tell me about adapting to military life?
Military, I think probably to me, military life, like I say, I always wanted to go into the Army, so I was determined that that was what I was going to do, and make the best of it. It going in, it is definitely very physical. They got to get you in shape, so they you do a lot of physical fitness and torture for some people. I was not real overweight and was played some sports in high school, so the physical fitness probably wasn't that hard. It's the discipline and someone telling you what to do and what not to do every minute of every day, and that's probably the hardest thing for most people, not being an individual. The Army or the military teaches you that it's a unit, that you have to become a team and not an individual. And so that part is hard sometimes. The privacy, you all sleep and eat and go to the bathroom and everything else together. So there is not real much privacy in the military. But like I say, there again, for me, it wasn't probably as hard as it was for some people. You get homesick. There's no doubt about it. As a I went in when I was 19 years old and got out at 23. At 19, I was, you get homesick and obviously wonder if you've done the right thing. But it was something that I think I adapted to, and I think one of the biggest things that I was very fortunate, I think so, was when I originally joined, to go into Army Security Agency, and since I had a security clearance already, the EOD were recruiting and recruited me from 4 weeks into basic training, asked if anyone would like to volunteer for EOD, and I think going into EOD was one of the better things for me, as far as a very tight unit and very close people. So I enjoyed that very much.
How did you choose the branch of service you served in?
Well, like I say, all of my family all were in the Army. I'm sure I had a few cousins or whatever that did serve. I know I had a good close cousin that was in the Air Force and a pilot with the B-58 Hustlers. And was in Vietnam. But I chose the Army because that's, like I say, my family was all in it. But then at that same time, I did, when I went down to the Army, to the recruiting station, obviously they have all of the branches there, so I looked into the Air Force and listened to their sales pitch, and the Army and the Navy and the Marines. But I always remember, as I left the Navy and was going to the Army last, knowing that was probably what I'd go into, and I went into the Army guy, and he seen me, and I just visited the Navy, and he says, hey, there's one thing about being homesick when you first join, he says, but being seasick and homesick is a whole different story. So I thought that was kind of cute. So, but I went into the Army basically because all of my family and my dad was in the Army, and then my dad too. After he had got out of the Army, after that World War II period, he went into the Army Reserves, and then was in it, retired out of the Army Reserves as an officer, and so I would go with him to the 2-week camps, and I'd go over sometimes with him on his once a month meetings, and so the Army was what I was meant to be.
What kind of training did you have?
Well, basically my whole training in the armed forces in the Army was with the explosive ordnance disposal. Like I say, there are many different things in the EOD. We started out with, as I was first told you, was we go to the chemical school, and that was down at Fort McClellan in Addison, Alabama. There you're exposed to the different types of chemicals like mustard gas, nerve gas, and how these different chemicals affect people and biological and how these different chemicals affect your plants and water sources. And so that's where my first school was. And then after you pass out of chemical school and how EOD was, and I'm sure it still is today, as you go through the different courses, like the chemical school, well, if you don't pass the chemical class, then you don't move on to the next one. Well, our next one was in Indian Head, Maryland. It was a naval school, actually, and at Indian Head, Maryland, that's where the main EOD courses were taken. We were there, would do our, at the same time, we had like hazardous aircraft, hazardous classes, missile classes, your standard high explosive classes, conventional weapons. We went through our clandestine devices, booby traps, that kind of things. But we would go from there. We went down to like Eglin Air Force Base and practiced on dummy bombs, obviously. So that's basically where we did mostly our main EOD school. And that then after though. I had been to Vietnam and went to Turkey. I did come back to Indian Head, Maryland, and then went through the nuclear EOD class for nuclear weapons. But basically, my whole period that I was in the explosive ordnance disposal.
Did you have any friends back home when you were still in the Army?
Oh yes, I had quite a few friends that stayed home. I'd say probably, obviously, majority of them did, and out of my immediate family, I was the only one that actually went in. During a war situation, as we have now, during the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict and war we have going on, it is a time when you don't want to go in if you don't want to go to combat. Probably more likely you're going to go to Iraq or Afghanistan and be in combat if you went in during the peacetime. So I had more that didn't go in, and then too at the same time, there were quite a few of my friends that did join the National Guards and Reserve. So there was a few that stayed back home that did that. But yeah, I had friends back home.
Where did you serve?
When I basically my two main areas were in stateside, obviously school, and upstate New York. But my main, serving in the Army was in Vietnam and in Turkey. Vietnam, I was with the 184th EOD team stationed out of Quy Nhon, Vietnam, in 2 Corps. There, I did do some TDY to other places like Saigon and other installations in Vietnam, but from 1968 to 69, in June I was in Vietnam, and then from there I went to Karamsel, Turkey. Actually, which our headquarters were out of Heidelberg, Germany. That was where the main EOD headquarters was for all of Europe, and then I got stationed from our headquarters to Karamsel, Turkey, which is in the just on the Sea Marmara, which is just across from Istanbul, Turkey, but on an Air Force installation. But we were an EOD team stationed there, covering northern Greece and the Middle East. But that was my main stations.
Actions or duties away from the front line?
In the probably when you talk about maybe asking about frontline, EOD is, and as I'm sure because of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, with so many of the injuries and the enemy using the IEDs and roadside bombs, EOD is not away from the front line. So even though there are especially like in Vietnam, obviously, or in Iraq, there are areas that are hotter than others. But so as far as away from the front line, uh, we always had the same duty, you know, and not saying that other guys didn't too, what their positions were, because I tell you, as much as I'm very proud of being an EOD tech, I still probably have the highest regard for the infantrymen as anybody out there. They are on the front line.
Did you have any friends when you were in the war?
Oh, sure. I think probably is of all the things that I know, uh, I've had a few of my friends that are back here now, my age, said, I wished I would have went into the Army, because of all the things that I think that if anyone that's ever been in the armed forces, even if they weren't in combat, obviously being in combat, you become a very tight bond. It's something that you can't ever really express to anybody. But when you live and eat and everything else that you could imagine, it, day in and day out for months, you became very close. And that's not saying there weren't times that we didn't have our arguments, but I have a very close bond with all my friends that I was in this armed forces, and especially my EOD friends. And that's saying that having friends in when you were in the Army, after coming back home, many years later, a friend of mine that I was in Vietnam with asked me, called me up, and Googled me actually, and got a hold of me and said, hey, we have an organization called the Vietnam Veterans EOD, and a national organization actually. It's called the National EOD Association. And I did join this, and have seen quite a few of my friends that I was in Vietnam with, and two other EOD men from Korea, World War II, and eventually we'll be picking up the EOD men. And like I said, and here is my Vietnam EOD Veteran Association badge. But this is where I did have a very bonding with my fellow EOD members.
How'd you stay in touch with those back home?
Obviously, at that stage in 1968, we didn't have the cell phones and things, so I think I might have called home a couple times, and I think there were telephone stations set up, but it was mainly by mail. And the mail didn't take that long to get through. I think maybe it was like maybe 2 weeks or something like that, or a week to get you a letter. So I think that how I stayed in touch myself was I've always been able to reflect on people, and so my memories, I would just think about them, and that's how I would stay in touch with people, but by the mail. But I'm sure I did. I think I called home a couple times.
What did you do when you were off duty?
Most of the times when I was off duty, basically how it worked with the EOD teams, we had our base camp was in Quin Yon, and back at base camp you would have maybe like a USO or a service club where you could go down, and this one base camp I was at, it even had a swimming pool, and so we'd go swimming, and but one of the things I've always enjoyed music, and so we'd go down to the USO or service club, and they had guitars, and so our buds, we'd take out the bass guitar and the rhythm guitar, and I think they had maybe a piano, I can't remember all, in the drum set, and anybody that could play, we'd go. So then that was one thing that we used to do a lot. You played cards, obviously. I never really was much of a card player, so I probably was down to the USO playing music, but I definitely enjoyed coming back and being in the pool. But like I say, but what we did in EOD, we'd be we'd come back and be back maybe for like 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'd go out into the field on a fire base and stay out there for 2 weeks. And with EOD, because we really weren't out on maneuvers like an infantryman patrol would, we'd be back at our two-man team on an LZ on a fire base, and would read and listen to music and visit the other battalions. But music probably was my favorite.
Were you still overseas when the war ended?
No, by the time that the war ended, which I think was somewhere around 1974, I got out in 1971, so I was back home at the time.
Where were you?
When I got back home, I went back home to Kokomo, Indiana. And one of the great things too about enlisting, I knew that when I did get out, that Public Service Indiana had to offer me my job back, and of course I was going to take it, because actually when I did go into the service in 1971, I had only or 1967, I'd only been working for Public Service for just over a little bit of a year. And so I was a first-year apprentice. So I went back, served my apprenticeship program, and at the time too, the military, the VA, had a thing where they paid me journeyman's wages to go through the apprenticeship program, and so that I got paid journeyman's wages. I went through my apprenticeship program, and then become a journeyman lineman with the company there.
How did you return home?
We returned, all back then. Everything was everything was by flight, and we flew back in to Washington, where I flew into, and then took a private plane back to Indianapolis to Kokomo.
Reception by family or community?
I think probably that is. I mean, obviously my family were at the airport to greet me and see me home. But I think, as we all know, the Vietnam era, and one of the things why I also have joined the Vietnam Veterans of America, the VVA, to hope that the Vietnam will be the last veterans that will not have a reception home. And then one thing I just saw today on the news, that there was a National Guard unit coming back from Afghanistan, and a very good reception for each unit. So besides my family, no, we didn't get much of reception for our troops.
How hard was it to return to
Civilization? Civilian life? Civilization. It's obviously, and when after I left Vietnam, obviously going to Turkey, I was in the Middle East, and so, and being an EOD, it is very exhilarating, and it is hard to sometimes to readjust. I think probably the hardest thing for me was I kind of had maybe a chip on my shoulder, wanting to be more recognized, but it was just a bad era. And so, I've gotten over it. I think most of it.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
Yes, I joined the VFW. I'm a life member of the VFW. I'm a member of the American Legion. Post 6 in Kokomo, both VFW and the American Legion in Kokomo. As I showed you earlier, I did join the National EOD Association, Vietnam Veterans, the VVA, and I am too a member of the Howard County Vietnam Veterans. But the organizations have helped me, and I enjoy being around my fellow veterans.
Any contact with fellow veterans?
Yes, probably. Like I say, my biggest one is when I did join the National EOD Association, and actually did get to be back in contact. And my best buddy that I was in Vietnam with, my closest friend, lives up by Bend, Oregon, and which in our next EOD reunion will be there. It affected me, I think, in many ways. I enjoyed it, and even afterwards, and I didn't obviously couldn't have appreciated the benefits that I have received. I'm getting VA benefits at the VA Roudebush Medical Society. I have had two children that have gone through university through the VA. And the VA and the Army has given me very many benefits.
Lessons learned?
Lessons learned is that discipline is something you have to have if you want to be in the Army, and I probably one of the things. Even though I'm not saying I'm that disciplined now, but you have to have it when you're in there.
I see you have some things. Would you like to share them with us?
Sure, I would like to. Probably, to start off with, which is one of my, I am very proud to show you my EOD certificate from the U.S. Naval School, Explosive Ordnance Disposal. So that was my EOD. Here are some of my ribbons that I had when I was in the service, and here at the top is my EOD badge. So that was my EOD badge. I won 2 Bronze Stars. This is my Bronze Star medal. 2 Army Accommodations medals. This is my Vietnam campaign medal, a National Defense Medal, a Good Conduct Medal, and the Republic of Vietnam campaign medal. This is a plaque I got while I was in Turkey from my EOD team that I was with. I am proud to show you my citation for my Bronze Star. I guess that probably the first time I ever showed this to anybody. But anyway, I'm proud of it. And that's about all I have. All I do, I take that back. I do have one thing that I don't know how much it will pick up, but that's what I used to look like back when I was 19 or 18. And here's a few pictures, and this is my Army accommodation certificate. And here's a few of the pictures of me and a few friends when I was in Vietnam.
Thank you, Roger McCormack, for letting me interview you.
Thank you, Emmy. I've appreciated you letting me come here with you.